A lot has been happening. NFL training camps have been going on for like a month now, and we've gathered valuable information from the preseason games. But it can be hard to track all of this, but luckily I have you covered. Here are the players that are skyrocketing up my rankings based on the recent news. And let's begin with Kenneth Gainwell, the Eagles running back, who is rising rather quickly. Now, Gainwell goes in drafts as the RB59, the 187th overall player. In a lot of your leagues, he's not being drafted at all. But we have to talk about some of the stuff that's happening. First, the recent reports out of training camp, as you can see right here on Twitter. Kenny Gainwell has the most touches among the running backs in camp. He also has by far the most carries with the first team offense. And it's not like he has just one more carry. Look at this right here. It says that he has 21 carries. Nobody else has more than 11. Gainwell has been operating as the clear RB1 in camp, which is interesting because Gainwell has experience in this system from last year, but DeAndre Swift and Penny don't, and they're still not earning work. That may just mean that Gainwell is the de facto RB1, although backs will be rotated, but he's not drafted like that. And let's not forget that Gainwell, as you can see right here, this is the snap count for the Super Bowl. Gainwell had the most running back snaps for the Eagles. He had 37. Miles Sanders had just 26. No other running back saw a snap. He was trusted the most in the most important game. Now, here's what you need to know about Gainwell himself. He was a mega producer in college. I mean, check this out. His final year of college, he had over 1,400 rushing yards, over 600 receiving yards. He totaled nearly 2,100 total yards, 16 touchdowns. And the big thing, the dude has the fantasy cheat codes at the running back position, meaning the receiving game work. 51 catches has been top 5 for any running back that season, and is one of the best running back performances we have seen out of a prospect in quite some time. And this production has translated to the NFL. Gainwell ranks top 20 in yards per touch through his first 2 seasons. And check this out. Here's even more positive camp reports that help Gainwell. DeAndre Swift has really become less involved in camp as it's gone on, so they're not even that thrilled in using him as much. And then Rashad Penny, you can see right here, he has the most carries with the third team offense, and he has the second fewest carries with the first team. There's more and more rumors building that Penny could be cut from this roster. And that wouldn't be totally shocking because he has the least money invested in him from this team, less than $1 million. That is less than Boston Scott. And oh yeah, let's not forget that Nick Sirianni, the head coach of this team, often wears a Kenneth Gainwell shirt. So I mean, it might not mean anything in terms of Gainwell being the RB1, but it means that he's definitely in the good graces of the coach. Now, a lot of people saw the first preseason game and Kenneth Gainwell was rested, and so was Boston Scott, and they said, oh, Gainwell's definitely the starter. Typically, this would be the case. But if we read the quote on Twitter after the game from Zach Berman, an insider here, Nick Sirianni basically talked about playing the running backs, and he said he wants all the running backs, if you were to read this, the summary is he wants all the running backs to see the ball in the preseason, to actually get tackled, so it's not first live reps week 1 getting tackled, so they have fumbling issues. So Rashad Penny and Swift got the run this game. He's saying and claiming that Gainwell and Scott will get the run next game, which by the time you're watching this video would have been on Thursday Night Football in week 2 of the preseason, so maybe they will be involved and there's nothing to read into it. If those guys don't play, yeah, Gainwell is steaming as the RB1. Now, the next player rising up and skyrocketing up my rankings is Alvin Kamara because of the recent news. Look, Alvin Kamara only got a 3-game suspension for violating the personal conduct policy at the Pro Bowl last year. This was expected to be 4 to 6 games, so potentially half than some people were thinking. Obviously, he has to move up. Now, a lot of people will point to the fact that Alvin Kamara last year, although he scored fantasy points, he wasn't efficient. And these people would be correct. He had a career worst efficiency in terms of his rushing. He was 46th in overall rushing efficiency, but factoring his receiving game where he was still very good, still top 25 in yards per touch, averaging 5 yards per touch. Now, despite being inefficient, Kamara still finished as the 13th running back in fantasy because he's still an elite receiver. But now he goes as the RB26. There's just so much upside here. Obviously, he's going a little bit later because he's not going to play the first 3 weeks, but from week 4 on, when you really need him, fighting for the playoffs, in the playoffs, he's going to be there for you. And this is some encouraging news from Nick Underhill, one of the better writers for the Saints, if not the best. He says Alvin Kamara didn't have a lot of burst last year, but this offseason he hired a new trainer and he's basically been controlling some things like combat fatigue, and right now he has more burst and the Saints have data to prove it. This data is just sports science and trackers, and if you watch the first preseason game, Kamara looked already like he had way more burst. So Kamara is skyrocketing up my rankings, and so is the first tight end we'll talk about here, the rookie 2nd-round pick for the Green Bay Packers in Luke Musgrave. And plain and simple, here's why. I've been tracking all the valuable preseason usage from the starter reps. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram to see all that information. But in the first preseason game, when the starters got some extended run, the Packers' Luke Musgrave played 100% of the starter snaps. He's expected to be heavily involved week 1. And he was used in all different ways, across the middle of the field, as a blocker, in motion, on go routes. They used him everywhere. And the reason why this is exciting and they can use him everywhere is because he's an elite athlete. He is the 15th most athletic tight end of all time. Out of over 460 that attended the combine, that's top 3% of all time. Now, the knock on him is that he doesn't have the college profile in terms of production because of injuries. He only had 14 career starts in 2021 and 2022. But in 2022, he averaged over 80 yards per game and he averaged about 8 targets per game. So he's sort of like a projection to the NFL, but the film that we do have on him. He's been dominant. And when you have that type of athleticism combined with being 6'6" and 253 pounds, yeah, you're going to be a matchup problem. And the way that they used him in the preseason so far, he can do a lot of things.
And then in week 2, Luke Musgrave continued his great usage and honestly got even better. He played all 17 snaps with the starters. He earned 3 targets on 9 routes run. That was a team high in terms of your targets for the starters. This dude already looks the part for the Packers.
So expect him to be heavily involved in week 1. He's often undrafted in a lot of fantasy leagues. You can just take him as like the last pick in your draft and stream him as your starting tight end and see how it goes. So Musgrave's a tight end that's moving up my rankings, but a guy that I'm actually concerned about and I'm moving him down is Greg Dulcich in Denver. Now, I was a fan of Dulcich earlier this offseason. As a rookie, he was top 5 in tight end usage and finished as a top 10 fantasy option in 50% of his starts. But then this offseason, he gained competition. The Broncos traded for Adam Trautman, who has past experience with new head coach Sean Payton during their time in New Orleans. And they also added Chris Manhertz, who is a veteran tight end, a blocking tight end. So in 2 tight end sets, he'll be on the field over Greg Dulcich. And now here's some of the concerns that we saw early on in the preseason. Greg Dulcich actually operated as the tight end 2 for the Broncos, and Manhertz didn't play in this game. If he would have played in this game, Dulcich might have saw even less run. It was Adam Trautman who played 25% more snaps with the starters, and Adam Trautman was a guy who saw 3 targets to 0 for Greg Dulcich.
Now you might be saying, oh, week 1 was just a blimp. No, because week 2, the same exact usage continued. You can see right here, Adam Trautman played 17 snaps to Greg Dulcich playing just 11 snaps. Now this is concerning because Dulcich has played less than 50% of the snaps with the starters this preseason. He's only played 47% of the snaps, which would be 28% than his usage last year.
So because of this, you have to temper expectations and probably throw him way down your rankings. That's what we're doing here. But this next tight end is rising. And you might not even call him a tight end midway through the season. He might just become the starting slot receiver for the Bills because he's being used that way a lot right now in Dalton Kincaid, the first-round rookie. Basically, all the reports out of camp is that Dalton Kincaid, he's expected to line up more as a receiver, and that's where he's primarily practicing in camp, but it was nice to see it actually in a game during the preseason. Because Kincaid played 100% of the snaps with the starters. He was out there in 2 tight end sets with veteran Dawson Knox, but then he also stayed on the field as a wide receiver in 3 wide receiver sets. He was the slot wide receiver. And now this is exciting because Josh Allen's slot wide receivers averaged 13 points a game, which would rank 3rd amongst all tight ends last year. And Kincaid is more athletic and a better option than his average slot wide receivers in the past, like Cole Beasley or Isaiah McKenzie. Kincaid averaged 34% of his team's offensive production in college. That's his dominator, which is 94th percentile, top 6% of all time. And now he got the first-round capital in this year's NFL draft to incentivize heavy involvement in the offense. So we like Kincaid, but then a player that's actually moving down my rankings is the veteran Najee Harris in Pittsburgh. Because Najee Harris was in a split backfield, and he saw less snaps actually with the first-team offense in the preseason game. Jaylen Warren saw 60% of the snaps, Najee Harris just 40%. So actually, as we're talking about this, Jaylen Warren is also moving up my ranks. And it's not all that surprising if you've been paying attention for the last year or so, because this is Jaylen Warren last year. He was top 12 as a rusher, and also his yards per touch as a receiver, he was top 12, which was 40% better than Najee Harris. Look, plain and simple, Najee Harris currently goes as the running back 11 in fantasy drafts, and I just don't want to be drafting him there. He's moving down. He might move outside my top 15 backs because the only reason you liked him, he wasn't efficient, was because he can see a lot of volume. But now if Warren's taking half the snaps or more, that's out the window. And then, yeah, we got to address what happened in week 2 of the preseason. Now, the Steelers starters only played 7 total snaps in week 2. In that game, Jaylen Warren saw 2 of the snaps, Najee saw 5, but Warren, even though he only saw 2 of the snaps, the fellow was dealing with an injury in camp that week, so maybe he was being limited here. He ends up taking the 1 touch that he has, shows his explosiveness, and goes for 60 plus yards and a touchdown against the Bills' #1 defensive players. Now, if you were curious, these charts that I am pulling from all the preseason usage are from PFF. But let's move to a running back, a rookie running back who is skyrocketing up my rankings right now. And if you're enjoying this content, finding it helpful, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Take 2 seconds. It helps me out, but it'll also help you stay ahead of your buddies. Now, that rookie running back moving up my ranks is 3rd-round rookie out of Tulane in Tajae Spears for the Titans. Look, Tajae Spears has been in a camp battle with Hassan Haskins for the running back 2 job in Tennessee. Obviously, Derrick Henry is the starter here, but it's important to see who the handcuff is there because Henry's averaged 330 touches the last 4 years, and he's getting older. You never know if he misses time. Well, in the preseason, it was a pretty clear-cut option in the first game who the starter is here. Tajae Spears, he ended up playing 75% of the snaps with the starters. Henry did not play in this game, and he earned all 7 running back touches with the first team. Hassan Haskins saw none. Now, in week 2, Tajae Spears continued his RB2 dominance. You could see here, he played 14 of the potential 16 starter snaps, so he goes out and plays 88% of the snaps, and he earns 7.5 yards per touch. Now, this is exciting news because Tajae Spears, in a lot of league formats, currently goes undrafted. On average, he's being taken as the running back 63 off the boards outside the top 200 players, so likely not even drafted in your league. Now, you might not be familiar with Spears because he's a 3rd-round pick. He was out of Tulane, so here's what you need to know. This dude was as good as it gets in college. Nearly 1,600 rushing yards, over 250 receiving yards. He had over 1,800 total yards, 21 touchdowns. He was as productive as it gets. He's a solid athlete and an above average pass catcher. He has some knee issues that are probably going to plague him in the next 2 or 3 years, but for this year, he's fine. And if anything happens to Derrick Henry, Spears will immediately become a top 15 running back. Take him with your last pick, or at least consider taking him there. Now, the next player skyrocketing up my rankings is a tight end, and it is Darren Waller of the New York Giants. Because Waller got some preseason run. You can see right here, he had 8 snaps. He ran 8 routes, which was all the routes that were actually out there for the starters, and he earned 4 targets, 50% target rate on his routes. And he looked good in the middle of the field. He was used in creative ways, and Daniel Jones loves targeting the middle of the field slot players. And this is going to be Darren Waller's main competition. Based on the first preseason games with the starting unit, it's been Hodgins, Paris Campbell, and Darius Slayton as the starting unit. None of these guys have ever been able to earn targets at an elite rate. Now, Waller had a frustrating year last year in 2022, missing a lot of games, but it was because of an early season hamstring injury. You can see right here, October 10th. He missed 7 games because of this, and he's later admitted that he was never 100%. But when he was healthy, he was #1 in tight end deep targets, 2nd in yards per reception, and top 10 in tight end efficiency. So grab Waller and also consider this next rookie receiver. Now, I wouldn't say Jonathan Mingo is skyrocketing up my ranks, but he's definitely moving up the Carolina Panthers rookie. Look, he started the first 2 games with the other starting receivers in Adam Thielen and DJ Shark, and in this past game, he played 20 snaps out of a possible 21, but he ran all 8 routes that the starters ran. And he earned 2 out of the 5 targets, worth noting, small sample, but from his new quarterback in Bryce Young. Now, the Panthers drafted Mingo in round 2, but they actually had a first-round grade on him. Mingo was the 2nd most athletic wide receiver at this past year's combine out of 72 receivers. I mean, he has elite speed at 226 pounds, one of these elite size speed freak athletes like a DK Metcalf or AJ Brown. Now, here's the issue you should be aware of with Mingo. Mingo relied primarily on his strength in college, and his route running is a major question mark. But he was still able to put up respectable numbers in terms of earning targets. He earned a target on nearly 24% of his college routes, well above average. He is a name to keep an eye on. And another name to keep an eye on quickly is Jeff Wilson, because he's been the only Dolphins running back in the preseason to be rested both games. He looks like the starter, and that's what the reports are saying. And when Jeff Wilson was actually healthy last year for Miami, he was a top 12 running back, averaging nearly 14 points per game. Now, the next player that is definitely skyrocketing very far up my rankings is the Vikings RB second-year player Ty Chandler. Now, Chandler has been in a training camp battle for the running back 2 job with Kenny Ngongwu. Here's what you need to know about Ngongwu. I mean, this guy is as good of an athlete as it gets. All of these bars right here, according to Player Profiler, they're supposed to be closer to 100% the better. All of them are trending towards 100%. His speed, burst, agility, even his strength, his bench press is well above average. He was a 4th-round pick in 2021 and the 3rd most athletic running back in that draft class. But the concerns for Kenny are pretty damn glaring, and the reason why not a lot of people knew about him before the Vikings drafted him that year is because of this right here. He has really no production profile out of college. His most carries in a year were 61. Before that, I mean, you're looking at 39, 27, and 16, just basically no run. He was averaging like 3 touches per game throughout his college career. He also doesn't catch passes. He's mostly a special teams and a really good special teams player for the Vikings. I expect that to be his role this year, and he's also currently hurt. And this has allowed Ty Chandler to kind of gain the running back 2 job. In the first preseason game with the starters, he played 76% of the snaps and looked very good, dynamic, explosive, can catch passes with Alexander Mattison resting. Now, this heavy usage continued into week 2 when Kenny Ngongwu did not play yet again, but you can see Ty Chandler right here, his 36, this number, that's his amount of snaps out of a potential 41. So Ty Chandler played nearly 90% of the snaps with the starters. And what does he do with all these snaps? 36 snaps is a lot. Well, he gets 10 rushing attempts. 10 rushing attempts was the only running back to see a rush attempt, a carry with the starting unit. And Ty Chandler isn't just an RB2 handcuff. No, there's a chance that he could take touches for Mattison because Mattison isn't any type of spectacular player. Here's what you should know about Chandler. He also has elite speed, 92nd percentile speed according to Player Profiler, and he actually has college production. When you look at his rushing yards, nearly 1,100, over 200 receiving yards last year. In his first year as the main guy, he transferred to UNC. He had 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns. Now, the reason you didn't hear about him last year was because he was injured most of the year, and obviously Dalvin Cook was there. But with Dalvin Cook and Zeke signing, there's less potential threats coming to this Minnesota backfield. It looks like Chandler's the guy. Now, a player that I'm slightly concerned about, and he's moving down my rankings, is Christian Kirk, believe it or not, the Jags wide receiver who had a career season last year. But in the first preseason game, we got to see the starters, Trevor Lawrence, Ridley, Etienne. They were running plays, and Christian Kirk was only used in the slot. He was taken off the field in 2 wide receiver sets. Zay Jones and Calvin Ridley, as you can see here, played in 2 wide receiver sets, and Kirk came off the field. Now, last year, this wasn't the case. Christian Kirk was in on 2 wide receiver sets 90% of the time. But if you're coming off the field now as a slot receiver only, you're going to lose snaps and targets and production. You can see right here, Christian Kirk ranked top 20 with 518 routes run last year. But if this trend trend continues that Zay Jones is actually staying on the field in 2 wide receiver sets when a lot of us, even myself before this game, thought it would be Kirk, well, if this continues, Kirk has to move down. And of course, it's a small sample, but they showed their hand. This is what they've been practicing in camp, and they took it to the game, so that's a concern. So if Kirk is moving down, well, that means that Zay Jones has to move up. And just like Christian Kirk, Zay Jones is coming off of a career year in this offense. The year before that, he had a solid year with the Raiders, and he got paid money by the Jags, and he's been producing. And Jones is one of the players that I'm the furthest ahead on in the market. He's my 116th player. I'm 56 spots, so 5 to 6 rounds ahead of the market. And now what that tool was my top 255 rankings. It's just a small portion of what you can get in the fantasy blueprint. Because look, plain and simple, if you want to win your league, smack around your buddies and take home a championship, the fantasy blueprint is for you. It has all the tools and analysis you need to do just that. Win your league, and it's simple to get. You just click the link in the description below or scan the QR code on the screen and follow the 2 easy and simple steps. And look, here's the deal for you. I want this to be accessible. It's just $5 for the entire year. Not just for your draft, but you'll get the tools every single week, almost daily during the season up until your fantasy playoffs. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll just refund that $5. This is risk-free. The goal is to get you there and to win a championship. So again, to acquire the fantasy blueprint, just click the link below or scan the QR code on the screen right now and follow those 2 quick steps. Now back to Zay Jones, because as we were saying, he saw a career high by far last year, playing in 16 games, 121 targets and 82 receptions. This resulted in him finishing as a top 30 wide receiver, but now he goes as like the wide receiver 60 in drafts. And it wasn't just heavy targets that he was getting. No, he was efficient last year. Jones was 25th in yards after the catch, 30th versus man coverage, and 26th at earning targets. So you might be saying, why is he dropping in drafts? Well, it's because of the added competition, pretty obvious, in Calvin Ridley being assigned here. He's now the de facto wide receiver 1, and a lot of people thought Christian Kirk, as you can see here, was going to be the other receiver to stay in on 2 wide receiver sets like he did last year. So people thought that Zay Jones would be losing the snaps, but according to the first preseason game, it's going to be Kirk losing the snaps. And a lot of people still aren't realizing this because Zay Jones goes as the 173rd player as the wide receiver 64, but in this offense with Trevor Lawrence, how good they were last year, they could be a top 5 offense easily this year. Zay Jones is worth a pick. And so is this tight end, who is quickly becoming potentially a top 15 tight end for me, the 4th round pick from last year, the tight end for the Cowboys, Jake Ferguson. Because he was the clear-cut tight end 1 with the starters in the preseason. He played 100% of the starter snaps. He earned 3 targets. He was very efficient on those. And in fantasy football, as you can see here, he's still going undrafted. Throughout camp, he was thought to maybe be in a competition with Luke Shoemaker, but Shoemaker has been injured all camp as a rookie, and it's hard enough to be a rookie tight end. And if you're not getting anything in the preseason or camp, you're not really going to do much in year 1. And one more thing, Dak Prescott, yeah, he loves his tight ends. Dalton Schultz was the tight end 9 last year and the tight end 4 the year before that, because look, Dak Prescott just likes throwing. He's comfortable throwing to the tight end position. And very quietly, Schultz led this team last year in the receiving department with 15 red zone targets. I mean, I'm not going to say Ferguson takes all of those, but if he's put into this role, that's really good for a guy who's like not even drafted right now. So consider Jake Ferguson in a similar mold to Luke Musgrave. These guys are going to start, they're going to be out there, and they're going to be used often. And speaking of Luke Musgrave, his rookie teammate, 2nd rounder, who was taken right around him by the Packers this year, the wide receiver Jayden Reed, is skyrocketing up my rankings. He just has to move up the ranks. Because all camp, early on in camp, this was like the first week of camp that Andy Herman tweeted this out, Jayden Reed is getting reps with the ones in the slot right away. He's basically been the starting slot receiver according to camp reports. But then it was actually nice to see that happen in the preseason with the starters out there, with Jordan Love out there, with AJ Dillon, with Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs on the outside in that game. It was Jayden Reed who played 100% of the snaps out of the slot for this team. Now, despite this rookie goes in the 17th round of fantasy drafts, not even taken in a lot of them. I would prefer him, honestly, probably even over guys like Zay Jones that we've talked about. He is that dynamic. I mean, here's what he did in his first preseason action ever. I mean, the dude is just absolutely fantastic. Those types of catches, contested catches, he was making throughout his entire college career.
And in week 2, we saw the same exact usage. Jayden Reed plays 9 out of a potential 17 snaps with the starters because he's operating mostly as a slot wide receiver, but on his 6 routes run, he earns 2 targets, including 1 beautiful touchdown from Love to Reed.
Now, he has above average speed and size, but the best thing about him was his production, because in college, he earned 25% of his team's targets. He was a top 15 downfield producer and 36% of his team's offensive production. So draft him in the late rounds and then temper expectations on this next back. And that would be Travis Etienne in Jacksonville. Now, it's nothing too crazy to jump up and down about, but it's a little bit alarming what we saw in the preseason. Etienne was out there as a starter playing the majority of the snaps, but he was actually taken off the field in the red zone and on 3rd down. And you could see Dwayne McFarland adds adds more context in that short yardage situation. Tanks Bigsby came in, and on third down, similar to last year, Jermichael Hasty came in. It is worth pointing out that there was a passing play in the red zone, and Etienne was on the field for that play, but not involved. Now, we haven't been the biggest fan of Etienne because he's not the biggest running back to earn a red zone role. He wasn't efficient there last year and wasn't a good pass catcher. They didn't even like using him there last year. Now, another player that is rising up my rankings, it just has to be Rashad Bateman. I think he's been a sleeper all offseason. I think a lot of people have been concerned about him because of his foot injury, but that can all be put to rest. Because as of last week, Rashad Bateman returned to practice. He came on the field and he hugged the field right away, and he is on pace right now to play week 1. Now, despite this, Bateman still goes as the wide receiver 53 in drafts, which is just a little bit odd to me because of the guys he goes behind. He goes behind Quentin Johnson, who's at best the third option for the Chargers behind Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, and is currently behind Josh Palmer on that depth chart. He goes behind Jamison Williams, who's suspended for 6 games, hasn't looked all that good, is getting negative publicity from his own coach. And then you have Rashad Bateman, who's potentially the wide receiver 1 on his team. I mean, if you don't believe me, just ask Lamar Jackson. Because Lamar Jackson back in May in OTAs and when the team was meeting up, he said, "It's great to see my guy back out there. He's the wide receiver 1 for sure." And he performed like this when he was healthy last year for, yes, a limited sample. He was the wide receiver 13 in efficiency ahead of Jamar Chase. So now these players are skyrocketing up my rankings, and some of them are falling. Now, speaking of my rankings, if you want to see my top 24 players, the players in those first 2 rounds, the reliable players that you need to make sure you're getting right, well, check out this video right here. And just a reminder to take 2 seconds to hit that subscribe button before you go so you can stay up to date on all of the content I drop to stay ahead of your buddies in fantasy.